It was a typical afternoon, the kind Sarah had grown accustomed to in her quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting a golden glow over her neatly trimmed lawn. She was inside her house, sipping her coffee and reading a book, when suddenly, the tranquility was shattered. A deafening crash filled the air, followed by the high-pitched squeal of tires. Sarah's heart leapt in her chest as she instinctively jumped to her feet. Her mind racing to comprehend what was happening, she rushed out of the front door, barely registering the familiar smell of her freshly baked cookies still wafting from the kitchen. As soon as she stepped onto her front porch, she froze. There, embedded in her brick wall, was a red Jeep, the front end crushed and crumpled. Her beautiful home, her sanctuary, was suddenly violated, its structure compromised by an out-of-control vehicle. Sarah's stomach twisted with shock as she approached the wreckage. Inside the car sat Emily, Karen's daughter, her eyes wide and confused as she stared blankly at the steering wheel. Sarah could see that Emily wasn't seriously hurt. The young woman was disoriented, her hands shaking as she slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed out of the car. Her long hair was tousled, and she looked like she had just emerged from a nightmare. It was clear that she had been shaken by the crash, but there was no blood, no visible injury. Relief washed over Sarah for a brief moment, but it quickly gave way to concern as she took in the scene before her. Before she could approach Emily, Sarah heard someone yelling. She turned to find Karen storming down the sidewalk, her face contorted with rage. Karen's arms flailed in the air, and her voice carried on the wind, shrill and accusatory. Sarah sighed, bracing herself for the inevitable confrontation. It didn't take long for Karen to reach her, and when she did, the words started flying faster than Sarah could process. "You have got to be kidding me. How could this happen?" Karen screeched, her hands trembling as she pointed at Emily, who was standing next to the Jeep, looking embarrassed and guilty. "Look at what your daughter has done. She's ruined everything." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Karen, it's an accident. Emily wasn't hurt. That's what's important," she replied, trying to stay calm despite the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside her. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too consumed by her anger. Karen's eyes narrowed as she turned towards Sarah. "What kind of irresponsible person lets someone park like this?" she snapped. "You should have had better barriers in place. What if she had hit a person instead? What are you going to do about this mess? You're going to pay for this damage, aren't you?" Sarah was taken aback. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "I'm sorry, but this isn't my fault. Your daughter lost control of her vehicle, Karen. I didn't cause the accident." Karen's voice grew louder. "I'll make sure this is resolved," she barked, her face flushed with fury. "We'll talk to the Ho about your irresponsible behavior. They'll make sure you're held accountable." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted her. Mr. Reynolds, the president of the Ho, appeared at the end of the street. He was a middle-aged man with a typically neutral expression, but there was something in his eyes today, something she couldn't quite read. He wasn't his usual confident self. As he approached, he exchanged a few words with Karen, his tone low and hushed. Sarah was certain that something was happening behind the scenes, something that didn't sit right with her. "Sarah," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice almost apologetic, "I'm sure we can sort this out. Don't worry about it too much right now. We'll take care of it." "Take care of what?" Sarah asked, unable to hide the skepticism in her voice. "My house is destroyed, and Karen's blaming me for something I didn't do. This isn't something that just gets taken care of." Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just give it some time. I'm sure it'll all work out." Something about his behavior, the way he kept glancing at Karen, made Sarah uneasy. But she decided not to press the issue further. Not yet. She'd deal with this in her own way. But little did she know that this moment would mark the beginning of a long, difficult road ahead. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, insurance claims, and trying to make sense of the damage done to her home. The insurance company wasn't helpful at all. The agent on the other end of the line told Sarah that, because Emily was technically a guest in the neighborhood, the claim might not be covered. Sarah had been meticulous in maintaining her property, but suddenly, none of that seemed to matter. It felt like the walls of bureaucracy were closing around her. Then came the shock of all shocks. Several weeks after the accident, Sarah received a legal letter from Karen's lawyer. The letter claimed that Sarah was responsible for the damage to Emily's vehicle, accusing Sarah of not maintaining her property properly and suggesting that it was Sarah's lack of maintenance that caused the accident. The letter even went so far as to demand compensation for emotional distress caused to Emily, distress that, according to Karen, had been caused by the accident. Sarah was stunned. This wasn't just an accident anymore. It was a full-blown attack on her integrity, her home, and her reputation. She was furious but determined. Sarah contacted a lawyer named Tom, an experienced attorney who specialized in personal injury and property law. Tom was confident that the case could be won. He reassured Sarah that the evidence was on her side. There were photos of the damage to her home, witness statements from neighbors who had seen the crash unfold, and the police report clearly stated that Emily had been speeding and lost control of the vehicle. Emily had been reckless, and Sarah was determined to make sure the truth came to light. The courtroom was tense as Sarah took her seat. She had never been involved in a legal battle before, and the atmosphere was overwhelming. Karen and Emily were seated at the opposite table, their faces hard and determined. Karen, as usual, was attempting to control the narrative, whispering in Emily's ear while casting glances of disdain at Sarah. Sarah kept her focus, reminding herself that this was about justice, not just for her, but for everyone who believed in fairness. Karen's lawyer began to present their case, claiming that Sarah had failed to properly maintain her property, which had led to the accident. He argued that the wall had not been sturdy enough to prevent the vehicle from causing damage, despite the fact that Emily had been speeding and not paying attention to the road. It was clear that their argument was weak, but it was enough to make Sarah's heart pound. She couldn't let this lie stand. Emily's testimony was a turning point in the case. Her voice trembled as she explained her version of events, but the details didn't add up. She was vague and hesitant, unable to explain why she had been speeding down the street in the first place. She claimed that she had lost control of the vehicle when she swerved to avoid something on the road, but there was no evidence to support this. The more she spoke, the more the inconsistencies became apparent. It was Tom's turn to cross-examine her, and he didn't hold back. He expertly highlighted the contradictions in Emily's testimony, pointing out the lack of clear answers and the questionable nature of her driving habits. As Emily faltered under questioning, it became clear to the judge and everyone else in the room that Emily was not being entirely truthful. The tide was turning. Then came the testimonies from Sarah's neighbors, all of whom had witnessed the accident. Several of them testified that they had seen Emily speeding just before the crash. One neighbor, Mrs. Howard, had even heard the tires screeching as Emily made a last-ditch attempt to regain control of the Jeep. Sarah's lawyer also presented the police report, which confirmed that Emily's reckless driving had been the cause of the crash. Slowly but surely, the case was tipping in Sarah's favor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge announced the verdict. The room fell silent as the judge declared that Karen's lawsuit had no merit. The crash had been caused by Emily's reckless driving, not Sarah's failure to maintain her property. The judge ruled in Sarah's favor, awarding her compensation for the damage to her home. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs of relief as Sarah allowed herself a small, victorious smile. As Sarah walked out of the courthouse, her steps felt lighter. The weight of the past few weeks had been heavy, but now it was finally over. She had stood her ground. She had fought for what was right, and she had won. Karen's manipulation had failed, and Sarah's home, once again, felt like her sanctuary. The victory wasn't just about the compensation, it was about reclaiming her peace and dignity. The ordeal had been long and draining, but it had made Sarah stronger. And she knew that no matter what happened next, she could face anything with the strength she had discovered within herself.